All right, so here we are. Let's continue what we're doing last time. So the reason why we put requires a student name here is that we're going to put two validation rules. First, we want the student to have a name, and this name should be longer than 2 characters. So because of this reason, we're going to write 2 different tests. In the first test, it'll check whether there's a name, and if there is, the second test will check to see whether it is longer than 2 characters or not. So let's start with the first one. Now, to be honest, of course, it's really easy. In fact, might be the easiest way for validation. But first, we'll specify the property that we attributed to the record must be defined. So in other words, it shouldn't be undefined, right? So in order to do this, we will add a new rule inside the student.js file. Inside our new schema, we've got to add more configuration here in place of string. So instead of simply writing string, we have to add a new full object in order to specify some of the validation options. So what we're going to do is add several different properties inside. First off, we'll start with the type of the name as string. Then after that, we want to be sure that the name will always be required in order to be valid. So we'll write required. And then as a first element, true. Second element, well, we write the warning or error that we want to display when there's no name. So we can simply say name is required right in here. Now, as you can see, we haven't done anything about the length of the name so far. It was only about the requirement of the name. So that means we'll go back to our validation test file, and inside the it block, the first thing will be creating a new student, then not give a name to the student, validate it, and at the end, we'll make an assertion about the error message. Yeah? Good. So we create a new student by writing const student equals new student and pass in a name undefined. In order to be sure that this will be invalid, or we can just leave it blank. It doesn't actually matter. But please remember here that we're not going to save this record because we will validate it and see the consequences. Okay, so now let's create another variable called results, and we will call a function student.validateSync, which will return an object. This will be analyzed as a result. So this result object will contain lots of properties if there are many wrong properties in the student properties. So the name of the validateSync function is slightly different than the function validate. The actual difference between them is that the validate with sync is synchronous in its validating process. So if we have a fancy validation, we use asynchronous validate as our function and callback function inside of it. But here we're just dealing with properties as they're given, and we want to decide whether or not they're valid, so we'll just use validate sync here. So we write console log result, save it, and let's see what will happen. Back into our terminal we go. So we can see the error message here, and it gives us a stack trace. It produces an error object. And at the top, it's got an error, and below, it has the error's property. Here, the name produces an error, and this is an object. It says name is required. Now, more importantly, at the end, we see this message property here. Now, in order to avoid unnecessary complications, we can write const message within a curly brace equals result.errors.name.message, and that enables us to get the error message instead of this line. All right, so now this is the ES6 code, which will prevent us from writing a message on both sides of the equal sign. So we write it in curly braces, so there's no need to add message statements here. Okay? And then lastly, we'll add our assert statement and put message equals name as required. Back into our terminal, and sure enough, it's passing. See? All right, so in the next video, we'll explore how to add advanced rules of validation around a single property.